Intelligent people don't fail because they're not good enough. They fail because they're too good at avoiding the one thing that would actually make them succeed. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. Because it means that the very trait you've been relying on your entire life might be the exact reason you feel stuck right now. Think about it. If intelligence was truly enough, the smartest people should be the most successful, the most decisive, the most confident. But that's not what we see in reality. Instead, we see something strange. We see highly intelligent people in their 20s overthinking simple decisions, delaying important moves, feeling lost in paths that never seem to fully start, while others, often less analytical, move forward faster, take more risks, and somehow build momentum. So the question becomes unavoidable. What's actually going on here? And more importantly, what is intelligence really doing beneath the surface that no one talks about? To understand this, we need to go deeper than productivity, deeper than discipline, deeper than motivation. We need to look at how the mind protects itself. This is where thinkers like Carl Jung and Friedrich Nietzsche become essential, because both pointed to something uncomfortable. Humans are not designed to seek growth first. They are designed to preserve identity. And that changes everything. Because if your identity is built around being intelligent, then every decision you make starts to orbit around protecting that image, whether you realize it or not. And this is where the first hidden loop begins. A child grows up being told they're smart. School reinforces it, results confirm it, people admire it. Over time, intelligence stops being just a trait and becomes a core identity. This is who I am. But here's the part no one warns you about. The moment intelligence becomes your identity, failure stops being feedback and starts becoming a threat. And if failure is a threat, what does the mind do? It adapts. Quietly, strategically, almost invisibly. You start choosing paths where success is more likely, avoiding situations where you might look average, hesitating in decisions that could expose uncertainty. But here's the question most people don't ask. If you're always optimizing to avoid looking unintelligent, are you still optimizing for growth? And this is where things start to turn. Because at first, these adjustments look like maturity. You tell yourself you're being careful, that you're thinking things through, that you're avoiding mistakes. But underneath that, another pattern is forming. You're no longer moving toward opportunity, you're moving away from discomfort. And those are not the same thing. In fact, they lead in completely different directions. So now the question gets sharper. If intelligent people are so good at thinking, why do they end up trapped in hesitation? The answer begins to reveal itself when you look at how intelligent people process reality. They don't just react, they simulate. They run scenarios, predict outcomes, calculate risks before taking action. And again, this seems like an advantage. But here's the hidden cost. When you simulate too much, you start experiencing consequences before they even happen. You feel the failure before the attempt, the embarrassment before the exposure, the regret before the decision. And once you feel something emotionally, even if it's imagined, your brain treats it as real. So what happens next? You hesitate, not because you're incapable, but because you've already lived through the worst-case scenario in your mind. But that creates another loop. The more you hesitate, the less real-world feedback you get. And the less feedback you get, the more you rely on simulation. And the more you rely on simulation, the more overwhelming the possibilities become. So now you're stuck in a cycle that looks like intelligence from the outside, but feels like paralysis on the inside. And here's the dangerous part. The smarter you are, the more convincing your justifications become. I just need more time. I'm still figuring things out. I don't want to make the wrong move. All of these sound rational, but what if they're not protecting your future and are actually protecting your ego? This is exactly where Nietzsche's idea becomes uncomfortable. He suggested that people are less interested in truth than they are in maintaining a stable sense of self. And if you look closely, that's exactly what's happening here. The intelligent mind starts optimizing for self-preservation instead of expansion. But if that's true, then we have a serious problem. Because growth requires exposure. It requires risk. It requires moments where you don't know what you're doing. And if your entire identity is built on knowing, how do you ever allow yourself to not know? Now the tension gets deeper, because at this point you might be thinking, so the problem is overthinking. But that's only part of the picture. If it were just overthinking, the solution would be simple. Just act more. But that doesn't work for most intelligent people. And the reason it doesn't work leads us into the next layer of this problem, a layer that has nothing to do with action and everything to do with meaning. Because in your 20s, you're not just trying to move forward, you're trying to move in the right direction. And for an intelligent mind, that becomes a trap. You don't want just any path, you want the optimal path, the meaningful path, the one that makes sense long term. But here's the question that changes everything. What if the need to find the perfect path is exactly what prevents you from walking any path at all? This is where Jung's perspective connects in a deeper way. He believed that growth comes from confronting the unknown parts of yourself, but that confrontation requires uncertainty. It requires stepping into situations where you don't have clarity, where you might be wrong, where your identity is not protected. And for someone who has always been right, this creates an invisible resistance. So instead of moving, they wait. They wait for clarity, wait for confidence, wait for certainty. But here's the problem. Clarity doesn't come before action. It comes after it. And this creates the final loop of this stage. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to move. The harder it becomes to move, the more you question yourself. And the more you question yourself, the more your identity starts to crack. Until eventually, a new thought appears. A dangerous one. Maybe I'm not as capable as I thought. But that thought is misleading, because the issue was never capability, it was direction. And that leads us to the question that most people never ask, but absolutely need to. What if intelligent people don't struggle because they think too much, but because they think in a way that keeps them stuck? If the problem were just overthinking, intelligent people could solve it the same way they solve everything else, by understanding it. But that's exactly where the trap gets deeper. Because this isn't a knowledge problem, it's a behavioral paradox. And the more you try to solve it purely through thinking, the more you reinforce the very pattern that's keeping you stuck. So now the question shifts. If intelligence is not failing you at the level of knowledge, where is it actually failing you? The answer starts to emerge when you look at how intelligent people relate to uncertainty. Most people experience uncertainty as something uncomfortable but necessary. They act despite it, they learn through it. But highly analytical minds tend to treat uncertainty as something to be reduced before action, not something to be experienced through action. And that small difference changes everything. Because if you wait to reduce uncertainty before moving, you enter a game you can never win. There will always be more variables, more unknowns, more risks to consider. And since your mind is capable of generating all of them, it will. Which leads to a subtle but powerful shift. You stop asking, what can I do now? And start asking, what could go wrong? And once that becomes your dominant question, your behavior follows. But here's where another layer reveals itself. Because on the surface, this looks like caution. It looks like intelligence being applied correctly. But underneath it, there's something else driving the process. Something quieter, but much more powerful. Control. Intelligent people often develop a deep need to feel in control of their environment, their decisions, and their outcomes. And thinking gives the illusion of control. The more you analyze, the more it feels like you're reducing chaos. But this creates a dangerous illusion, because real life doesn't reward perceived control. It rewards adaptability. And adaptability only develops when you step into situations you cannot fully control. So now we have another loop forming. The more you try to control outcomes through thinking, the less you expose yourself to unpredictable situations. The less you expose yourself, the less adaptable you become. And the less adaptable you become, the more you feel the need to control. And suddenly, without noticing, you're stuck in a closed system. A system where your intelligence is working perfectly, but only inside a space that no longer produces real progress. But let's push this further, because there's an even more uncomfortable question hiding underneath all of this. If intelligent people are so aware, so capable of seeing patterns, why don't they see this one? Why don't they notice that they're stuck in a loop? The answer is simple, but not easy to accept. Because the loop is built out of things that feel right. It feels right to think things through. It feels right to avoid unnecessary risks. It feels right to wait until you're more prepared. And because all of these feel correct, they don't trigger alarm. They don't feel like mistakes. They feel like intelligence being used properly. And that's exactly why they're so hard to break. Because you're not fighting something that feels wrong. You're fighting something that feels like your strength. Now here's where things start to connect back to the idea of meaning, but at a deeper level. Intelligent people don't just want progress, they want coherent progress. They want their actions to make sense within a larger framework of identity, purpose, and long-term direction. And again, this seems like a strength, but it creates another hidden consequence. When every action needs to align with a larger meaning, small actions start to feel insignificant. And when small actions feel insignificant, they get delayed. And when they get delayed, momentum never builds. So now the problem isn't just hesitation, it's fragmentation. You have ideas, plans, potential paths, but none of them fully activate into consistent movement. And without movement, there's no feedback. And without feedback, there's no clarity. And without clarity, you go back to thinking, which reinforces the loop again. At this point, something important starts to happen emotionally. Frustration begins to build. Not loud frustration, not visible frustration, but a quiet internal pressure. The feeling that you should be further ahead. The sense that you're capable of more, but somehow not translating that into results. And this is where many intelligent people make a critical mistake. They assume the problem is discipline. So they try to push harder. They try to force action. They try to override the hesitation. But forcing action without changing the underlying pattern doesn't work for long, because the same loops will recreate themselves. You'll start something, then question it, make progress, then overanalyze it, gain momentum, then slow yourself down with doubt. And each time this happens, confidence takes another hit. Not because you lack ability, but because your behavior is inconsistent with your potential. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you understand what needs to be done, but still don't do it? Not because you're lazy, but because something in you resists committing fully? That resistance is not random, it's structured. It's the result of all the loops we've been building up to this point. And once you see it, another question emerges. If the resistance is structured, can it be broken? Before we go there, pause for a second and notice something. If any part of this feels familiar, if you recognize yourself in these patterns, then you're already doing something most people don't. You're becoming aware of the mechanism, not just the outcome. And that's where change starts. So if this is resonating with you, take a moment to leave a comment saying, "I see the pattern." It might sound simple, but putting it into words forces clarity. And if you want to go deeper into ideas like this, make sure you subscribe and like the video, because this channel is about breaking down the hidden structures behind behavior, not just giving surface-level advice. Now let's go back, because awareness alone is not enough. You can see the pattern and still stay stuck in it. So what actually breaks the cycle? Most people think the answer is action. Just act, just move, just start. But for intelligent people, that advice often fails. And the reason it fails is subtle. It doesn't address the root of the problem. The root is not inactivity. The root is misaligned thinking. Specifically, thinking that is oriented toward protecting identity instead of expanding it. So the real shift is not from thinking to action. It's from one type of thinking to another. Instead of asking, how do I avoid being wrong? The question becomes, how quickly can I find out if I'm wrong? Instead of optimizing for certainty, you optimize for feedback. Instead of protecting your identity as someone who knows, you start building an identity as someone who learns. But that shift is not easy, because it requires letting go of something that has defined you for years. The need to be right, the need to appear competent, the need to maintain a consistent image of intelligence. And letting go of that feels like losing control. It feels like stepping into chaos. Which brings us to the edge of the biggest realization in this entire discussion. If intelligent people are stuck not because they lack ability, but because they are protecting an identity, then the real question is no longer about success. It becomes something much deeper. Who are you without the need to always be intelligent? So now we can finally return to the question that's been quietly building beneath everything we've said so far. Why do intelligent people feel stuck in their 20s, even when they clearly have the ability to move forward? At this point, the answer is no longer scattered. It's starting to come together. It was never about lack of discipline, never about lack of opportunity, and definitely not about lack of intelligence. It was about direction. More specifically, it was about the direction of thought itself. Because throughout this entire process, intelligence wasn't failing. It was working perfectly. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to predict, to analyze, to simulate, and to protect. The problem is that it was pointed in the wrong direction. Instead of being used to explore reality, it was being used to defend identity. And once you see that, everything starts to shift. Because now all the loops we talked about begin to connect. The hesitation wasn't laziness, it was self-protection. The overthinking wasn't preparation, it was avoidance. The search for the perfect path wasn't ambition, it was fear disguised as precision. And the need for certainty wasn't intelligence, it was resistance to vulnerability. Every piece that once felt separate now reveals itself as part of the same structure. A structure designed not to move you forward, but to keep you safe from being wrong. But here's the part that changes everything. If the system is designed to protect you from being wrong, then the only way out is to change your relationship with being wrong. Not avoid it, not minimize it, but actively move toward it. And this is where the real shift happens, because it flips the entire logic your mind has been using. Instead of asking, how do I make the right decision? You start asking, how quickly can I expose myself to reality? Instead of waiting for clarity, you create clarity through action. Instead of trying to maintain an identity of intelligence, you start building an identity of adaptability. And this is uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable, because it means letting go of the one thing that has always made you feel secure. The idea that you are someone who understands, someone who gets it right, someone who stays in control. But if you hold on to that identity, you stay trapped in the same loops. So the real transformation is not about becoming more intelligent, it's about becoming less attached to needing to appear intelligent. Now think about how this rewrites everything. The person who moves forward is not the one who thinks the most, but the one who tests the most. The one who learns fastest is not the one who avoids mistakes, but the one who accumulates them strategically. The one who builds confidence is not the one who waits to feel ready, but the one who acts despite not feeling ready and survives the outcome. And suddenly, what once looked like recklessness starts to look like a different form of intelligence. A form of intelligence that is grounded in reality, not just in thought. And this brings us back to something we opened earlier, but didn't fully resolve. The idea of meaning. Because a lot of intelligent people get stuck not just because they overthink, but because they are trying to find the perfect, meaningful path before they begin. But here's the truth that most people only realize much later. Meaning is not found before movement. It is constructed through movement. You don't discover the right path by thinking about it. You discover it by walking, adjusting, failing, and recalibrating in real time, which means that waiting for meaning is just another form of delay. So when you look back at everything, the pattern becomes clear. Intelligence created awareness. Awareness created hesitation. Hesitation created inaction. Inaction removed feedback. And without feedback, the mind filled the gaps with more thinking, which reinforced the cycle again. But once you break that chain at any point, the entire system starts to collapse. And the easiest place to break it is not at the level of emotion, not at the level of motivation, but at the level of behavior. Small, imperfect, immediate action. And here's the final insight that ties everything together. Intelligent people don't fail because they think too much. They fail because they trust thought more than reality. And once you reverse that, once you start trusting reality more than your own predictions, everything begins to change. You move faster, you learn faster, you adapt faster. Not because you became smarter, but because you stopped using your intelligence as a shield. So the real question is no longer, why do intelligent people fail in their 20s? The real question is this: are you willing to let go of the version of yourself that always needs to be right in order to become someone who actually grows? Because at the end of the day, your potential was never the problem. Your intelligence was never the problem. The only thing that ever stood in your way was the direction you were using it. Now I want you to think about your own life for a moment. Where are you waiting for certainty? Where are you overanalyzing instead of acting? Where are you protecting an identity instead of building a reality? These are not easy questions, but they are the ones that actually change things. So if this made you reflect, if something here shifted the way you see yourself, leave a comment sharing your biggest takeaway. I read all of them, and it helps push these ideas further. And if you want to keep exploring concepts like this, breaking down the hidden patterns behind behavior, make sure you subscribe and stay close. There's also a link in the description where you can go deeper into this kind of thinking and start applying it in a more structured way. Because once you see the pattern, you can't go back to not seeing it.